Welcome back, everyone, to our free parenting webinar. My name is Dr. Tara Egan, and I am the owner of two businesses. One is Charlotte Parent Coaching, which is a private practice located in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the other one is Dr. Tara Egan, LLC, and that is the part of my business where I promote my books, where I have parent resources offered like webinars, this training, the private Facebook page I do, and then of course the weekly podcast, the weekly parenting podcast that I offer, and I co-host that with my teenage daughter. So welcome back. Today we're going to talk about YouTube and its impact on kids. So this is a topic I discuss so very often with my clients. I'm going to go ahead and show you this slide, which is just some information about me. And then I'm going to go ahead and get started. So as we're talking about YouTube today, I want you to think about how you use YouTube, how your children do, because I really want us to reflect on whether or not it's being used for the fun reasons, right? Like entertainment, information, or if it is veering into a range where it's unhealthy, where excessive amount of time is being spent on YouTube, or if content that is not appropriate for your child's age is being accessed. So I just want you to think about that as we go along. So a couple of things to know about YouTube. It's the second most popular website in the world. It's right behind Google. It's ahead of Amazon and Facebook. So it's a big deal. I mean, it's a real powerhouse when it comes to demonstrating products, determining what content gets the most exposure. So it's really important to understand what a significant role it has in our society. 2.74 billion users worldwide, and people watch more than 1 billion hours of video each day. And so when we were doing our research, which I thank my assistant Julie for helping me with, when it came to the kid-themed YouTube channels, which are the most popular type of content on the platform, as of January 2021, Choo Choo TV, Nursery Rhymes, and Kids Songs was the most subscribed kids content channel with nearly 45 million subscribers. So it's just interesting to think about all the stuff we do on YouTube and to think about the influence the content has on children. 80% of US parents report that their child aged 11 or younger watches videos on YouTube. And when we look at how often or how much time kids are spending on YouTube, about half report, or roughly half say their child does this on a daily basis. And in my experience in working with my clients and seeing my own children, YouTube is so very popular, and it really, for a lot of people, a lot of kids, replaces television. So it's not that they're just going on it for a few minutes to find out information. It's become a primary source of entertainment where kids can spend hours engaging with YouTube every day. All right, what I want to do is talk about YouTube Kids, because there's the regular YouTube platform. To be honest, most of us have access to that, and most of us give our kids access to that. But there is a YouTube Kids channel, which is a kid-targeted portal to YouTube. And it's really aimed towards preschoolers all the way up through tweens. And it does have ad-supported TV shows. So your kids are getting inundated with ads, musical, videos, educational videos, and there is content that is user-created. So when I look at the information that is portrayed by Common Sense Media, which is a really fantastic resource that parents can use to assess whether or not information online is age appropriate, they actually indicate that YouTube Kids really shouldn't be used with children who are younger than the age of 7, even though YouTube Kids markets itself to kids who are 4 and older. So I just wanted to note that there is a discrepancy in viewpoints about which age group is most appropriate for YouTube Kids. Some concerns that we want to consider. This app, YouTube Kids, does have inappropriate videos that include things like nudity, alcohol, profanity, and then a lot of advertisements for junk food and just unhealthy components of living. And one of the ways that they do this is that the creators or the producers of this content, the inappropriate content, will use characters from TV shows such as Peppa Pig or Caillou, and they'll use cartoon graphics. So if you're a parent and you kind of are skimming over the content your kids are looking at, or you walk by and you look over their shoulder, you're really going to feel pretty secure that your kids are looking at something that's age appropriate. But oftentimes these characters are attracting kids to those videos, and then those videos contain a lot of inappropriate content. So I have seen where content will include, for example, the Minecraft branding, and the Minecraft characters will be engaging in sexual activity. And sometimes kids don't even know what they're looking at. Like, they don't realize it's inappropriate because it's just a cartoon that they're used to watching. So that can mean that even if parents have a basic trust that their kids will turn off content that doesn't feel right, there's a lot of times kids aren't even really able to detect that it is inappropriate content to turn off. These videos oftentimes have really kid-friendly titles. They begin normally, and then they transition over to inappropriate materials. And the creators who create these videos will oftentimes kind of fool the algorithm by using tags to categorize the video as a kid-friendly video. So even though YouTube Kids might be working pretty hard to keep this type of content away from kids, the creators out there are pretty motivated to expose kids to this material. And because so much of the decisions being made about content are computer-based, then it's just not a perfect system. Some protective features of YouTube Kids is that if a video is flagged as inappropriate on the main YouTube channel, they will automatically block it from the kids app. So it really is helpful for parents to block and flag content that their kids are exposed to that is inappropriate, because YouTube does want to prevent that content from being exposed or being used around other children. And when YouTube sees that a creator of these videos are producing content that's inappropriate, they will then block the opportunity for that creator to serve ads on that age-restricted content. So they do try to have a penalty in there so that somebody can't have a combination of age-appropriate content, create ads based on that, and then stick in things that are inappropriate. Because really, at the end of the day, people who are on YouTube want views. And if they create something that is shocking or titillating for children, sometimes that can elicit more views, which then, if there's advertisements associated with it, gets those advertisements more views. So YouTube does try to give a penalty for those who are using the platform inappropriately. There is also the introduction of human monitors. So even though the vast majority of content is curated through the computer programming and using the algorithms, they do have human monitors go in there and review things that have been flagged, and they try to look ahead and preview material to weed out content that would be disturbing. So in order for us to have enough human reviewers to review all the content out there, because obviously content is being produced in mass quantities daily. I mean, right now I'm producing content for a YouTube channel. It would be impossible for them to have enough human reviewers. So it's not, once again, it's not a perfect system. So some suggestions when it comes to allowing your kids to use YouTube Kids. It's really important to remember that YouTube doesn't have a content filter. It's really important to remember that YouTube doesn't have a content filter. And you can use parental controls, and you can have, you can use methods to create approved content only. So you're sort of whitelisting, or you're approving a list of specific channels and videos. and hopefully restricting access to videos and content that are not appropriate for your children. And so, and there's some content out there that is sponsored by brands and companies that really are motivated to create appropriate material, like PBS Kids. So you can, using some of the parental controls, restrict your kids' access to content that is approved by those brands, as well as content that has been human reviewed, so that you can feel more assured that your kids are seeing content that's been curated. You can also disable the search feature on YouTube Kids so that it prevents your kids from typing in random terms and then kind of going down a rabbit hole and being exposed to, maybe initially they're seeing content that's appropriate, but then it kind of inspires more and more content to come up that gets farther and farther away from what the original search term was. So this keeps kids from really having exposure to random things, because I have definitely seen incidents where kids have started off with some really benign search term, and then they click on the videos that are suggested on the side, and it just gets farther and farther away from something that's age appropriate. And I've had several clients come to me and say, you know, my kid started by looking up, I don't know, cars, and ended up seeing adults having sex in a car. And so some of these parental controls can be used to prevent exposure to some of those things. Once again, it's not a perfect system. If a parent sees that their child is looking at a video that's inappropriate, they can block that video to prevent it from coming up again. And then I think one of the most important features is the timer feature, where parents can set clear limits on their kids' screen time. However, when I was looking into this feature, one of the things I noted, and as far as I can tell it hasn't changed, is that you can set the timer for your kids and it can be set for up to 1 hour. However, because it's limited to 1 hour, parents can be tempted to not use the timer feature because they may be comfortable with their kids using YouTube for longer than an hour. So maybe they have to sit in a car ride line for you know, a sibling, and it's longer than an hour a day, or they're taking a ride out to grandma's house and it's a 2-hour drive, and they're comfortable with kids using YouTube in the car. Maybe they have to do, during this time of COVID, a work meeting, and it's something that they're allowing their kids to do. And when it limits it to an hour, sometimes parents are tempted just to not use that feature at all. So I find that a little bit frustrating and not necessarily realistic, because it just doesn't make it a feature that is responsive to some families. So I wish there was a little bit more control there, but there isn't. So I did want to make you aware of that. Now I want to shift over and discuss YouTube, the general channel that most of us have access to, whether it's on our phones, our computers, or tablets, and even on our TV, and just anywhere we can access the internet. So some things to be concerned about with YouTube is, once the user is recorded in YouTube as being 13 or older, there's no parental controls. There's nothing that you can do to guarantee that your kids are using parental controls on their account. So, and if kids understand that this parental controls are eliminated once they turn 13, kids will go in and change their birth date, or they'll create a new profile in which they indicate that their age is older. So then those protections that kids had when they were using YouTube Kids are no longer there. And so, and I mentioned this before, that adult content can be disguised as children's shows. So oftentimes when kids, the vast majority of kids who are exposed to pornography or pornographic content are exposed by accident. So it's not necessarily something that kids are searching out. They're not typing in, phrasing that would automatically lead them to that content. It's something that they come across accidentally. Of course, it's very exciting. It can really induce a lot of questions, and then it can cause kids to pursue other videos that might, catch their interest. So I did want to note that even if you have a kid who you really just feel like isn't there yet, isn't far enough through the puberty process where they would have a lot of curiosity about these videos, that doesn't guarantee that your kids are going to stay away from those, because that content can be accessed inadvertently. A lot of the content that kids are exposed to that's inappropriate is revealed in the comment section. So they might see abusive language, bullying. Comments can start out with a comment and then somebody replies and it turns into a conversation with somebody that might be inappropriate for your child to be speaking with. Racism, toxic content. There's just a lot of information that can be found in those comments, and it can be turned off. You can turn off contents, or you can turn off comments. However, because parental controls cannot be guaranteed on an account that is where the child is 13 or older, you might turn off those comments and have your kid just turn them back on. One of the things I wanted to mention and really give a lot of emphasis to is that kids, when they get on YouTube, is they scroll and scroll and scroll. And those videos are typically very brief, right? I mean, if you think of your kids watching YouTube, sometimes they don't even make it through the whole video. Like once the commercial comes up, they flick on to the next video. And so kids over time can really have poor frustration tolerance for waiting, for delayed gratification. And I know I felt that. I'm watching an interview, I'm interested in what's being said, a commercial comes on, and even if that commercial is 9 seconds, I feel that flash of irritation, and I have a fully developed brain. So if you have a kid who's 6, 7, 9, 12, they end up really going through the content very, very quickly. And so this means they're not seeing content from beginning to end. They're not seeing in-depth content. They're unlikely to notice the emotional cues in the content, if there is any emotional cues. And they're really just looking for content that makes them feel excited and satisfied. So kids get dependent on videos, on YouTube videos very quickly. And a lot of times when I talk to kids and families, I'll hear parents say, we really don't want our child to be exposed to violent video games. We really don't want our kids to be on Netflix all day. But it'll turn out that kids will keep going back and forth to YouTube all day. And so sometimes when we look at screen time and we see how much time is spent on YouTube, it could be anywhere from, a couple hours, but it could be as much as 9 or 10 hours, depending on how kids are using YouTube. And the longer your kids spend on YouTube, the more likely they are to come across content that's inappropriate. So for me, I'm going to be honest, I'm not a huge YouTube user. And when I go on YouTube, it's to look at something specific. I'll see an actor and I'll think, oh, I'd like to see an interview with them in it. Or I want to find out a specific piece of information. Recently I Googled how to make my remote control work because I wasn't sure which buttons to push. I go on, I watch that video, maybe a couple more to get a breadth of information, and then I move on. But with kids, they're very tempted to kind of use it all day on and off. And because it can be accessed from any technological device, it's really easy to access. So it can just turn into a situation where your kid really has low tolerance for anything that is more in depth or lengthy. And that can even impact kids' interest in watching a family movie. Because the plot is slow to build, there's a whole emotional component of a movie you're watching, it can just make them feel really impatient. And so there's a lot of times I'm seeing that parents are even struggling to have family time in front of media because of this. So recommendation. Definitely use those parent controls until the age of 13 to control content and to only allow approved content. Make sure you turn that search button off, that search feature off, so that your kid kind of just doesn't go down a rabbit hole of looking at information or content that's just farther and farther away than what their interests naturally are. One of the things I think can be very helpful is if your children cannot access YouTube from multiple devices, because it's really hard then to limit YouTube. So for younger kids, I encourage parents to allow it on one device, and preferably the big family TV, because then what they're watching is part of the family culture. Parents are going to have access to it really easily, and it really does help kids make better choices when they know that it's, that their browsing is right there for everyone to see. So oftentimes, because kids watch a lot of really annoying things on YouTube, it can be tempting to have them use it on their individual close-up devices like phones and tablets, but it is much harder to monitor in that situation. It's important that they log into an account, preferably your account, or have your accounts linked so that you can see what they're looking at and you can look at their search history. So my son's account is linked to my husband's. So when my husband opens up YouTube, he has a nice view of everything that my son has been looking at. Most of the time it's sports videos. I mean, he's really interested in looking at the highlights of different sports, and that we feel is appropriate content. But every once in a while, you can see he sort of got off track, and it helps us to know, do we need to have a conversation with him, make sure he's informed? Do we need to put different parental controls on that content? It just helps us be informed so that we can educate our son on the different components of being a responsible user online. Some things here, you can enable what's called restricted mode, which is it's when you go into your YouTube account and then you go into settings. I think you might need to go into general from that point, but if not, you might be able to access it just from the settings, but you can toggle over the restricted mode and you can limit their exposure to more adult material. Now keep in mind, in my investigations, I couldn't figure out a way to have parents be able to turn on that restricted mode and not just have a kid go in and turn it off. So just because you put some protections in your kid's account doesn't mean they're going to respect them. You can also turn off autoplay, and autoplay is when you're watching something on YouTube and it just goes and scrolls to the next video without you prompting it. So for me, I definitely had to turn this off because I would watch, I'm just going to use the example of looking at a video that shows a favorite actor or actress in an interview. And of course, the videos that are suggested right below it are more interviews. And so it'll scroll right to that next interview, and it can really cause your attention to be pulled in that direction, and it can distract you with some of your other responsibilities because it's just like, oh, I'll just watch one more. I'll just watch one more. And then oftentimes, like for example, let's say I'm watching an interview and they are doing an interview with another celebrity, it'll then show you other interviews with that other celebrity. So you can keep going round and round about it. So turning off autoplay so that your kids actually have to hit play and find another video is going to slow down, hopefully, them just kind of going down that rabbit hole and watching one video after another. Another thing you can do is you can download a video blocker. And these are created by third parties. They're not part of YouTube, but you can add them to your browser and then you can block videos by channel, subject matter, or keywords. So every once in a while, parents, they'll hear about a YouTuber who uses a lot of really foul language or just doesn't convey age-appropriate content, and their kid can keep finding ways to get back to that YouTuber, and this can be an effective way to block some of that content. It's a pain, right? Because it's not just part of the parental controls that are easily accessible. You're going to have to take that additional step to download a video blocker to protect your kids, but that's a really good option for some families. I mentioned this earlier about how one of the most important things that parents can do to protect their kids from YouTube is just limiting their time. If your child is using YouTube for a limited amount of time and they happen to come across material that's inappropriate, there's a very big difference between your kid getting exposed to it for 10 minutes versus 6 hours. There is a different consequence on the brain. Same thing with things like pornography. Your kid's probably going to see pornography, maybe not on YouTube, but they're going to be exposed to it. And if it might even be looking at a buddy's phone at school. And they see it for a few minutes. It's exciting. As a parent, maybe you don't want your kids to be exposed to that, but they're exposed to it. But that's very different from a kid being exposed to pornographic material at night in their phone, laying in their bed and looking at it for 4 hours by themselves because they don't have parental controls. So it really is important to your kids' development to have limited access to inappropriate content. And one of the easiest ways is to just not have them be on YouTube all the time, but to fill their day with other activities, even if some of those activities are technology-based, so that they don't have that sort of addicted response to YouTube. Whenever possible, pop in, you know, sit down next to your kid on the couch and say, hey, you know, what are you watching? What's fun for you? And look at it. And there might be a lot of content that feels kind of silly or even, you know, like a waste of time. But it is important to know, like, what is drawing their attention. And when they see that you are looking over their shoulder and monitoring it, even if you're not doing it all the time, it really opens up opportunity for discussion, and kids just make better choices when they're being supervised, even if the supervision isn't all the time. So it's important to not get complacent. A lot of times kids will be looking at inappropriate content. And I've seen this on my home visits with families where I'll say, hey, you know, bring me your tablet and show me the fun things you like to look at on YouTube. And they'll show me things that are extremely inappropriate, and they don't even know that what they're showing me is controversial. So the example I always give is I had a client, and this was probably a couple years ago, where the daughter was really interested in horses, and which is great. So she showed me a couple of videos of horses she liked, told me the different kinds. She was talking about different areas of the country and ranches where these horses are on. But then the search, or her, you know, as her travels through YouTube, very quickly led us to some of her favorite videos, which were about horses giving birth. Okay, animals give birth, it's a natural process. But then she was leading me to videos that showed people, mothers giving birth. So she is at 9 years old looking at really graphic videos of women giving birth, being in pain, you know, not really having the context to understand what was happening. And it wasn't what her parents would have chosen for her. They thought she was looking at videos of horses. So yeah, you can't get complacent, because kids are not necessarily able to identify, like, oh, this isn't where I should be. And they're not necessarily going to be able to self-monitor. And that's partly, you know, that's part of our job to do. The last thing I want to mention, and I apologize, I know this video is a little longer than normal, is that just a couple days ago, on the 24th of February, 2021, there was an announcement made by YouTube where they are in the process of creating a new experience for teens and tweens, because they are recognizing that their YouTube Kids platform feels like it's being catered to really young kids, whereas the regular YouTube is just filled with too much inappropriate content. So they're trying to find an in-between where parents will be able to grant limited access to their kids through a more supervised Google account, and it limits what kids can do. They might not be allowed to create videos, they might not be allowed to leave comments, and they have different versions of it. They kind of have 3 steps that they're discussing at this point. And this isn't released yet from what I can tell. It looks like they're in the process of like a beta program. And so they go through content that goes from Explore, which is like 9 and up, Explore More, which is 13 and up, and then most of YouTube, which is, you know, almost all the videos that are contained on YouTube, except for really age restricted content or content that is really sensitive in nature. So they are in the process of attempting to make the YouTube process more friendly for that middle age group, which I know as a parent who has kids within that age range, it is really hard because the YouTube Kids feel so restrictive to them. And there's always the other kids in their grade or their peer group who has unrestricted access on YouTube. So I appreciate the fact that they're trying to make this more parent friendly and kid friendly. It's important to recognize that with this new programming, the content is still going to be curated via a combination of user input, machine learning, and human review. So once again, it's going to be imperfect. So it's not going to replace the need for parents to be supervising and monitoring, but I think there's an attempt there and a recognition that we don't have it quite right. I know one of the primary frustrations for parents is their kids accessing YouTube during learning times, especially because we're in COVID right now and there's so many students who are learning via virtual learning, and YouTube is a common platform used by educators. And so parents don't feel like they can turn it off during school hours. So kids get really distracted and they go from one YouTube video to the next, even while they're supposed to be in class learning. And I feel like that's a real challenge for both teachers and parents, because it is oftentimes relying on the student to be able to self-monitor. And that's not necessarily realistic, because YouTube is really tempting. And so it's not that these kids are trying to be naughty, it's just so very tempting. And if we're faced with looking at YouTube on one hand versus being engaged with the online learning process, the YouTube's always going to kind of win out. So I know that that's a concern, and I think that that's a message that YouTube has heard loud and clear. So if you are in a family where the kids are really struggling to manage technology usage, and you feel like you're in power struggles, or you just need some support on how to make sure your kids are using technology for the fun and information, but not veering into the power struggles or the dependency, I do encourage you to check out my website, which is www.drtaraegan.com, and you can access some of the resources that I have available. I do offer one-to-one coaching, and those services are really meant to be responsive to your family. But I oftentimes work with parents primarily, but also the children, to do some education, talk about a plan for the family so that you can get into a healthier range. I also offer an online course that gives some really great information about all sorts of technology and social media issues. And it really is a great overview for families who are parents who just don't feel like they're versed enough in what their kids could be doing online. So we cover things like TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, some of the popular video games, and give you some ideas about how to appropriately monitor your kids, how to educate your kids to make sure everyone's staying in a healthy range and that you guys are working as a team, your whole family. Here's my contact information. You can email me, you can check out my Facebook page, and I really do encourage you to check out my weekly parenting podcast. We talk about all different topics. It's not just restricted to technology and social media, but it is really a helpful resource, and we're having a really nice response from the listeners. So that's it for today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, leave a comment, and I will do my best to tailor my YouTube channel to the needs of parents. So have a wonderful day, and thank you for being here.